Section 17 of John G. Paton, Missionary to the New Hebrides, an Autobiography, First Part by John Paton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10, Farewell Scenes, Part 3. On the 29th January, the young chief Kapuku came and handed to Mr. Mathieson his own and his father's war gods and household idols. They consisted chiefly of a basket of small and peculiar stones, much worn and shining with use. He said, "While many are trying to kill you and drive the worship of Jehovah from this island, I give up my gods and will send away all heathen idols from my land." On the 31st, we learned that a party of Miyaki's men were going about Mr. Mathieson's district, inciting the people to kill us. Faimungo also came to inform us that Miyaki was exerting all his artifice to get us and the worship destroyed. Manuman even sent, from inland, Rocky, his adopted son, to tell me of the fearful sufferings that he and his people were now passing through, and that some were killed almost every day. Rocky's wife was a chief's daughter, who, when the war began, returned to her father's care. The savages of Miyaki went to her own father's house and compelled him to give her up as an enemy. She was clubbed and feasted on. On Sabbath, 2nd February, 32 people attended the morning service. I addressed them on the deluge, its causes and lessons. I showed them a doll, explaining that such carved and painted images could not hear our prayers or help us in our need, that the living Jehovah God only could hear and help. They were much interested, and after worship carefully examined the doll. Mr. Mathieson and I, committing ourselves to Jesus, went inland and conducted worship at 7 villages, listened to by in all about 100 people. Nearly all appeared friendly. The people of one village had been incited to kill us on our return, but God guided us to return by another way, and so we escaped. During the day on 3rd February, a company of Miyaki's men came to the mission house and forced Mrs. Mathieson to show them through the premises. Providentially, I had bolted myself that morning into a closet room and was engrossed with writing. They went through every room in the house and did not see me, concluding I had gone inland. They discharged a musket into our teacher's house, but afterwards left quietly, greatly disappointed at not finding me. My heart still rose in praise to God for another such deliverance, neither by man nor of man's planning. Worn out with long watching and many fatigues, I lay down that night early and fell into a deep sleep. About 10 o'clock, the savages again surrounded the mission house. My faithful dog, Clutha, clinging still to me amid the wreck of all else on earth, sprang quietly upon me, pulled at my clothes, and awoke me, showing danger in her eye glancing on me through the shadows. I silently awoke Mr. and Mrs. Mathieson, who had also fallen asleep. We committed ourselves in hushed prayer to God and watched them, knowing that they could not see us. Immediately a glare of light fell into the room. Men passed with flaming torches, and first they set fire to the church all round, and then to a reed fence connecting the church and the dwelling house. In a few minutes the house too would be in flames, and armed savages waiting to kill us on attempting an escape. Taking my harmless revolver in the left hand and a little American tomahawk in the right, I pled with Mr. Mathieson to let me out and instantly again to lock the door on himself and wife. He very reluctantly did so, holding me back and saying, "Stop here and let us die together. You will never return." I said, "Be quick. Leave that to God. In a few minutes our house will be in flames, and then nothing can save us." He did let me out and locked the door again quickly from the inside, and while his wife and he prayed and watched for me from within, I ran to the burning reed fence, cut it from top to bottom, and tore it up and threw it back into the flames, so that the fire could not by it be carried to our dwelling house. I saw on the ground shadows, as if something were falling around me, and started back. 7 or 8 savages had surrounded me and raised their great clubs in air. I heard a shout, "Kill him! Kill him!" One savage tried to seize hold of me, but, leaping from his clutch, I drew the revolver from my pocket and leveled it as for use. My heart going up in prayer to my God, I said, "Dare to strike me, and my Jehovah God will punish you. He protects us and will punish you for burning his church, for hatred to his worship and people, and for all your bad conduct. We love you all, and for doing you good only you want to kill us. But our God is here now to protect us and to punish you." They yelled in rage and urged each other to strike the first blow, but the invisible one restrained them. I stood invulnerable beneath his invisible shield, and succeeded in rolling back the tide of flame from our dwelling house. At this dread moment occurred an incident, which my readers may explain as they like, but which I trace directly to the interposition of my God. A rushing and roaring sound came from the south, like the noise of a mighty engine or of muttering thunder. Every head was instinctively turned in that direction, and they knew from previous hard experience that it was one of their awful tornadoes of wind and rain. Now, mark, the wind bore the flames away from our dwelling house, and had it come in the opposite direction, no power on earth could have saved us from being all consumed. It made the work of destroying the church only that of a few minutes, but it brought with it a heavy and murky cloud which poured out a perfect torrent of tropical rain. Now, mark again, the flames of the burning church were thereby cut off from extending to and seizing upon the reeds and the bush, and, besides, it had become almost impossible now to set fire to our dwelling house. The stars in their courses were fighting against Sisera. The mighty roaring of the wind, the black cloud pouring down unceasing torrents, and the whole surroundings awed those savages into silence. Some began to withdraw from the scene, all lowered their weapons of war, and several, terror-struck, exclaimed, "That is Jehovah's reign. Truly their Jehovah God is fighting for them and helping them. Let us away." A panic seized upon them. They threw away their remaining torches. In a few moments they had all disappeared in the bush, and I was left alone, praising God for his marvelous works. "Oh, taste and see that God is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him." Returning to the door of the mission house, I cried, "Open and let me in. I am now all alone." Mr. Mathieson let me in and exclaimed, "If ever in time of need God sent help and protection to his servants in answer to prayer, he has done so tonight. Blessed be his holy name." In fear and in joy we united our praises. Truly our Jesus has all power, not less in the elements of nature than in the savage hearts of the Tannese. Precious Jesus, does he not chide us, saying, "Hitherto ye have asked nothing in my name? Ask, and ye shall receive, that your joy may be full." How much help, blessing, and joy we lose every day because we do not take all to Jesus as we ought. Often since have I wept over his love and mercy in that deliverance, and prayed that every moment of my remaining life may be consecrated to the service of my precious friend and Savior. All through the remainder of that night I lay wide awake keeping watch, my noble little dog lying near me with ears alert. Early in the morning friends came weeping around us. Our enemies were loudly rejoicing. It had been finally resolved to kill us at once, to plunder our house and then to burn it. The noise of the shouting was distinctly heard as I neared the mission premises, and our weeping friendly natives looked terror-struck and seemed anxious to flee for the bush. But just when the excitement rose to the highest pitch, we heard, or dreamed that we heard, a cry higher still, "Sail-o!" We were by this time beginning to distrust almost our very senses, but again and again that cry came rolling up from the shore, and was repeated from crowd to crowd all along the beach. "Sail-o! Sail-o!" The shouts of those approaching us gradually ceased, and the whole multitude seemed to have melted away from our view. I feared some cruel deception, and at first peered out very cautiously to spy the land. But yonder, in very truth, a vessel had sailed into the bay. It was the Bluebell, Captain Hastings. I set fire to the reeds on the side of the hill to attract his attention. I put a black shawl as a flag on one end of the mission house and a white sheet on the other. This was one of the vessels that had been to Port Resolution and had sailed past to Antietam some time ago. I afterwards saw the mate and some of the men wearing my shirts, which they had bought from the Tannese on their former visit. At the earnest request of Doctors Getty and Inglis, Mr. Underwood, the owner, had sent Captain Hastings to Tanna to rescue us if yet alive. For this purpose he had brought 20 armed men from Antietam, who came on shore in 2 boats in charge of the mate, the notorious Ross Lewin. He returned to the ship with a boatload of Mr. Mathieson's things, leaving 10 of the natives to help us to pack more and carry them down to the beach, especially what the missionary thought most valuable. The 2 boats were now loaded and ready to start. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon when a strange and painful trial befell us. Poor dear Mr. Mathieson, apparently unhinged, locked himself all alone into what had been his study, telling Mrs. Mathieson and me to go, for he had resolved to remain and die on Tanna. We tried to show him the inconsistency of praying to God to protect us or grant us means of escape, and then refused to accept a rescue sent to us in our last extremity. We argued that it was surely better to live and work for Jesus than to die as a self-made martyr, who, in God's sight, was guilty of self-murder. His wife wept aloud and pled with him, but all in vain. He refused to leave or to unlock his door. I then said, "It is now getting dark. Your wife must go with the vessel, but I will not leave you alone. I shall send a note explaining why I am forced to remain. And as it is certain that we shall be murdered whenever the vessel leaves, I tell you God will charge you with the guilt of our murder." At this he relented, unlocked the door, and accompanied us to the boats, in which we all immediately left. Meantime, having lost several hours, the vessel had drifted leeward. Darkness suddenly settled upon us, and when we were out at sea we lost sight of her and she of us. After drifting about for some hours in a heavy sea and unable to find her, those in charge of the boats came near for consultation, and, if possible, to save the lives of all. We advised that they should steer for Port Resolution by the flame of the volcano, a never-failing lighthouse seen 50 miles away, and there await the vessel. The boats were to keep within hearing of each other by constant calling, but this was soon lost to the ear, though on arriving in the bay we found they had got to anchor before us. There we sat in the boats and waited for the coming day. As the light appeared, we anchored as far out as possible, beyond the reach of musket shots, and there without water or food we sat under a tropical sun till midday came, and still there was no sign of the vessel. The mate at last put all the passengers and the poorest seamen into one boat, and left her to swing at anchor, while, with a strong crew in the other, he started off in search of the vessel. In the afternoon, No-War and Miyaki came off in a canoe to visit us. No-War had on a shirt, but Miyaki was naked and frowning. He urged me to go and see the mission house, but as we had seen a body of men near it, I refused to go. Miyaki declared that everything remained as I had left it, but we knew that he had lied. Old Abraham and a party had slipped on shore in a canoe and had found the windows smashed and everything gone except my books, which were scattered about and torn in pieces. The armed men there wanted to kill the Aniatiamese, but others said, "Not till we get Missy killed too." They learned that Miyaki had sold everything that he could sell to the traders. The mate and men of the Bluebell had on my very clothes. They boasted that they had bought them for a few figs of tobacco and for powder, caps, and balls, but they would not return a single shirt to me, though I was without a change. We had all been without food in the boat since the morning before, so No-War brought us off a coconut each and 2 very small roasted yams for the ladies. Those, however, only seemed to make our thirst the more severe, and we spent a trying day in that boat under a burning sun. Miyaki said, "As our fathers did not destroy Missy Turner's house, we will not destroy yours." But after a time, failing to persuade me to accompany him and fall into a trap, he muttered, "We have taken everything your house contained, and would take you too if we could. For we hate the worship. It causes all our diseases and deaths. It goes against our customs, and it condemns the things we delight in." No-War informed me that only a few nights before this, Miyaki and his followers went inland to a village where last year they had killed 10 men. Having secretly placed a savage at the door of every house, at a given signal they yelled, and when the terrified inmates tried to escape, they killed almost every man, woman, and child. Some fled into the bush, others rushed to the shore. A number of men got into a canoe to escape, but hearing women and children crying after them, they returned, and taking those they could with them, they killed the rest lest they should fall alive into Miyaki's hands. These are surely they who through fear of death are all their lifetime subject to bondage. The chief and nearly his whole village were cut off in one night. Not an uncommon thing in those islands where war becomes chronic and the thirst for blood becomes insatiable. The dark places of the earth are full of the habitations of horrid cruelty. To have actually lived amongst the heathen and seen their life gives a man a new appreciation of the power and blessings of the gospel, even where its influence is only very imperfectly allowed to guide and restrain the passions of men. Oh, what will it be when all men and all nations love and serve the glorious Redeemer? This Miyaki and his followers were a scourge and terror to the whole island of Tanna. They intensely hated No-War because he would not join in their cruelties. Yet he and Manuman and Sirawiya and Faimungo continued to survive long after war and death had swept all the others away. The first 3 lived to be very old men, and to the last they made a profession of being Christians, though their knowledge was very limited and their inconsistencies very grave and very numerous. Happy is it for us that we are not the judges for souls either of the white or the dark skin, as to how many and grievous things may be forgiven, and whether there be or be not that spark of love, that grain of faith which the Lord, the pitiful, will graciously accept and increase. See Appendix A, the prayer of the Tannese, etc. About 5 o'clock in the evening the vessel hove in sight. Before dark we were all safely on board and were sailing for Aniatiam. Though both Mr. and Mrs. Mathieson had become very weak, they stood the voyage wonderfully. Next day we were all safely landed. We had offered Captain Hastings £20 to take us to Aniatiam, but he declined any fare. However, we divided it amongst the mate and crew, for they had every one shown great kindness to us on the voyage. After arriving on Aniatiam, Mrs. Mathieson gradually sank under consumption, and fell asleep in Jesus on 11th March, 1862, in the full assurance of a glorious resurrection, and was interred there. Mr. Mathieson, becoming more and more depressed after her death, went over to Mr. Krieg's station on Maudé, and there died on 14th June, 1862, still trusting in Jesus and assured that he would soon be with him in glory. Never more earnest or more faithful souls entered the mission field, but they both suffered from weakness and ill health during all their time on Tanna, and had frequently to seek change by removal for a short period from the island. Their memory is very fragrant to me as fellow laborers in the gospel of Jesus. After their death, I was the only one left alive in all the New Hebrides mission north of Aniatium to tell the story of those pioneer years, during which were sown the seeds of what is now fast becoming a glorious harvest. 25 years ago, all these dear brethren and sisters who were associated with me in the work of the mission were called home to glory, to cast their crowns at the feet of Jesus and enjoy the bliss of the redeemed, while I am privileged still to toil and pray for the salvation of the poor islanders, and plead the cause of the mission both in the colonies and at home, in which work the Lord has graciously given me undreamt of success. My constant desire and prayer are that I may be spared to see at least one missionary on every island of the group, to unfold the riches of redeeming love and to lead the poor islanders to Jesus for salvation. What could be taken in 3 boats was saved out of the wreck of Mr. Matheson's property, but my earthly all perished, except the Bible and the translations into Tannese. Along with the goods pertaining to the mission, the property which I had to leave behind would be undervalued at £600, besides the value of the mission house, etc. Often since have I thought that the Lord stripped me thus bare of all these interests, that I might with undistracted mind devote my entire energy to the special work soon to be carved out for me, and of which at this moment neither I nor anyone had ever dreamed. At any rate, the loss of my little earthly all, though doubtless costing me several pangs, was not an abiding sorrow like that which sprang from the thought that the Lord's work was broken up at both stations, and that the gospel was for the time driven from Tanna. In the darkest moment, I never doubted that ultimately the victory there, as elsewhere, would be on the side of Jesus, believing that the whole earth would yet be filled with the glory of the Lord. But I sometimes sorely feared that I might never live to see or hear of that happy day. By the goodness of the ever-merciful One, I have lived to see and hear of a gospel church on Tanna, and to read about my dear fellow missionaries, Mr. and Mrs. Watt, celebrating the Holy Supper to a native congregation of Tannese, amid the very scenes and people where the seeds of faith and hope were planted not only in tears, but tears of blood, in deaths oft. My own intention was to remain on Aniatium, go on with my work of translating the Gospels, and watch the earliest opportunity, as God opened up my way, to return to Tanna. I had, however, got very weak and thin. My health was undoubtedly much shaken by the continued trials and dangers through which we had passed, and therefore, as Dr. and Mrs. Inglis were at home carrying the New Testament through the press in the language of Aniatium, and as Tanna was closed for a season, Dr. Getty, the Reverend Joseph Copeland, and Mr. Matheson all urged me to go to Australia by a vessel then in the harbor and leaving in a few days. My commission was to awaken an interest among the Presbyterian churches of our colonies in this New Hebrides mission, which lay at their doors, up to this time sustained by Scotland and Nova Scotia alone, and further and very specially to raise money there, if possible to purchase a new mission ship for the work of God in the New Hebrides, a clamant necessity which would save all future missionaries some of the more terrible of the privations and risks of which a few examples have in these pages already been recorded. After much prayerful deliberation with my brethren, and with my own heart before God, I somewhat reluctantly felt constrained to undertake the task. If my story was to be the means of providing more missionaries for the islands, and in providing a commodious ship for the service of the mission alone, to keep open their communications with the outer world and with Christian influences, not to speak of carrying their provisions at fixed periods or rescuing them when in troubles and perils from the jaws of death, I was not unwilling to tell it again and again if the Lord would open up my path. God knows my heart, and anyone who really knows me will easily admit that no selfish or egotistical motive has influenced me in reciting through all the Australasian colonies, New Zealand, Scotland, and latterly in many parts of England and Ireland, the incidents of my career and experience, first of all on Tanna, and thereafter for nearly 20 years, as the second part of my biography will relate, on the neighboring island of Aniwa, an island entirely given to me by the Lord, the whole population of which became Christian, and they and their race will be my crown of joy and rejoicing in the day of the Lord Jesus. With regrets, and yet with unquenchable hope for these islands, I embarked for Australia, having received the solemn promise of my brethren, that in entering upon this great effort I was to be left absolutely free of all control, and empowered to carry out the work as God might seem to guide me, and open up my way. I had only spoken to one man in Sydney. All the doors to influence had therefore to be unlocked, and I had no helper, no leader but the Spirit of my Lord. The second part of this autobiography, should God spare me to write it, will record His marvelous goodness in using my humble voice and pen and the story of my life for interesting thousands and tens of thousands in the work of missions, and especially for binding together the children of the Sabbath schools of Australasia in a holy league of help to the New Hebrides, which has already borne precious fruit to His glory, and will continue to do so for ages to come. Oftentimes, while passing through the perils and defeats of my first years in the mission field on Tanna, I wondered, and perhaps the reader hereof has wondered, why God permitted such things. But on looking back now, I already clearly perceive, and the reader of my future pages will, I think, perceive, that the Lord was thereby preparing me for doing, and providing me materials wherewith to accomplish the best work of all my life, the kindling of the heart of Australian Presbyterianism with a living affection for these islanders of their own southern seas, the binding of all their children into a happy league of shareholders, first in one mission ship, and finally in a larger and more commodious steam auxiliary, and, last of all, in being the instrument under God of sending out missionary after missionary to the New Hebrides, to claim another island and still another for Jesus. That work, and all that may spring from it in time and eternity, never could have been accomplished by me, but for first the sufferings and then the story of my Tanna enterprise. Some unsophisticated souls who read these pages will be astonished to learn, but others who know more of the heartless selfishness of human creatures will be quite prepared to hear, that my leaving Tanna was not a little criticized, and a great deal of nonsense was written, even in church magazines, about the breaking up of the mission. All such criticism came, of course, from men who were themselves destitute of sympathy, and who probably never endured one pang for Jesus in all their comfortable lives. Conscious that I had, to the last inch of life, tried to do my duty, I left all results in the hands of my only Lord, and all criticisms to his unerring judgment. Hard things also were occasionally spoken to my face. One dear friend, for instance, said, "You should not have left. You should have stood at the post of duty till you fell. It would have been to your honor and better for the cause of the mission had you been killed at the post of duty like the Gordons and others." I replied, "I regard it as a greater honor to live and to work for Jesus than to be a self-made martyr. God knows that I did not refuse to die, for I stood at the post of duty amid difficulty and danger till all hope had fled, till everything I had was lost, and till God, in answer to prayer, sent a means of escape. I left with a clear conscience, knowing that in doing so I was following God's leading, and serving the mission too. To have remained longer would have been to incur the guilt of self-murder in the sight of God. Never for one moment have I had occasion to regret the step then taken. The Lord has so used me during the 25 years that have passed over me since my farewell to Tanna, as to stamp the event with his own most gracious approval. Oh, to see a missionary and Christian teachers planted on every island of the New Hebrides! For this I labor and wait and pray. To help on the fulfillment thereof is a sacred work of my life under God. When I see it accomplished, or in a fair way of being so through the organization that will provide the money and call forth the men, I can lay down my head as peacefully and gratefully as ever warrior did, with a shout of victory in his ears. Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace. For the present, my pen is here laid aside. I shall wait to see what use the Lord makes of part first of my autobiography before I prosecute the theme. If the Christian public seems not to find in it the help and quickening that some friends think it likely to bestow on those who read, the remainder need not be written. Part second, if called for, will contain a record, in many respects, an utter contrast to all that has gone before, and yet directly springing therefrom, as will be seen by all who look beneath the surface. I am penning these words in 1887, and 25 years lie betwixt this date and my farewell to Tanna. These years, if ever published, will tell the story of my visiting all the colonial churches, and collecting the purchase money of our white-winged mission ship, the Dayspring, my return to Scotland, visiting all the home congregations in 1864, and securing several new missionaries to follow me to the New Hebrides, my second marriage and settlement on Aniwa, with her whom the good Lord still spares to me, the mother of our happy family, and my God-given helpmeet in all the work of the gospel. The conversion of that whole island of Aniwa from idolatry, and the planting there of a church and congregation of Christ, from which have since gone forth many native evangelists and teachers. Then there will fall to be recorded my call from the islands in recent years to revisit all the colonial Presbyterian congregations once again, telling them the story of the conversion of Aniwa, the sinking of the well, and other incidents which turn an entire people from idols and from cannibalism to the service of the living and true God. Whereby the churches, and especially the children, were led more and more to make the New Hebrides their own very harvest field in the heathen world. And finally, I will have to tell how I was again sent home to Scotland in 1884 to raise money for the purchase or building of a steam auxiliary mission ship, now urgently required in the interests of the mission, both because of the great increase in the number of the missionaries and the necessities of so many families, and also and chiefly to avert the dreadful disappointments and loss of time, and thereby sometimes of life itself, caused by the frequent becalming of our little Dayspring in these thickly islanded seas. That part of the story will show the fruits of the education and perils and experiences of a lifetime, in the marvelous impression produced by the simple and unadorned recital of the story of Tanna and Aniwa amongst the Christian people of Scotland, Ireland, and England. Multitudes were blessed in almost every town where a meeting was granted me. 3 missionaries devoted themselves to the New Hebrides and are already laboring there, while others consecrated themselves to several of the great seats of foreign mission enterprise in Africa and Asia. I returned to my own church of Victoria with a sum of nearly £9,000, of which £6,000 was for the new missionary steam auxiliary, and the remainder for the outfit and support of more missionaries for the islands. And that money I handed over to the Australian church, where it awaits, at interest in the bank, the arrangements being made by all the colonies to take each their due share in the future upkeep of the ship. For this, for everything, for all, praise be to the Lord. I never asked one subscription except in prayer and in my public appeals. The Lord sent in all freely to me through the hands of his people. To him be all the glory. I went back to Aniwa and found the work of the Lord going forward there as if in a regularly settled congregation at home, fostered and guided by an occasional visit of my ever dear and genuine friends, Mr. and Mrs. Watt, from old stern-hearted but at last relenting Tanna. The Church of Victoria has again summoned me to visit the colonial congregations, to tell the story of my mission life, and to promote the interests of its now grand and growing foreign scheme. It is in the midst of such labors, while addressing at least one meeting every day, and 3 or 4 every Sabbath day, that I have penned the preceding pages, and I leave them to speak for themselves without any attempt at ornament or style. The Lord whom I serve in the gospel knows my motive and my hope, and I very calmly leave this book to his disposal, and the succeeding volume to his guidance, if such there shall ever be. As the reader well knows, I have had to leave heavier and darker issues in the same blessed hands. I offer every one who has done me the favor to read or to listen my kindly greeting. May you and I meet in the glory of Jesus and continue our fellowship there. Goodbye. End of section 17, read by Alethea Karras.